Hi everybody, this is Age of Agility and I'm Nick LaFleur. Welcome to the show. How do companies like Apple or Samsung know they have enough materials to meet consumer demand when they release a new product? Or how could a container ship stuck in the Suez Canal impact the speed of construction in your city? Supply chain. It's one of those terms you hear frequently, but depending on who you ask, you might get different answers. For many, supply chain just means logistics, or warehousing, or procurement or plant management. But in reality, supply chain management is a combination of each of these functions across every company involved in creating an organization's product or service. For supply chain managers, the challenge is having a clear end-to-end visibility so companies can effectively forecast consumer demand to create products at scale. This week, we're talking with Martin Weis, a partner at McKinsey Company. With over 18 years of experience leading transformation programs for multinational companies, Martin is no stranger to the challenges around implementing new technology and establishing a culture of agility to bring about digital transformation. In this conversation, Shannon and Martin talk about the challenges that exist bringing end-to-end visibility within supply chain management, what agile supply chains all have in common, and how global disruptions such as the 2020 pandemic or the more recent Suez Canal incident shed light on common issues that come along with supply chain management. Take a listen and enjoy our conversation with Martin Weis, partner at McKinsey Company.
Welcome to the Age of Agility. This is a show where we talk to people who are facing unique challenges with an agility mindset. We'll learn from industry leaders, business and IT professionals, and even check in on our colleagues from time to time. Stay tuned as we explore the age of agility. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Age of Agility podcast. My name is Shannon Curran, and I am your host. I am here today with a very special guest, Martin Weis. Martin, thank you so much for joining us all the way across the world. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Shannon. It's always good to go back to QuickBase and discuss with you around the age of agility.
Awesome. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, maybe tell them where you are, and sort of your experience in the space of agility in your day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so. So I, as you said, come from across the ocean. So I'm based in Switzerland, and I work as a partner for McKinsey Company. I'm working on various tasks, but everything has to do with digital transformations, especially in supply chain management, but also in back office functions. Yeah. So, and when we look into digital transformations, it's not only about technology implementations and making use of the latest and greatest emerging technologies, but it's also how to become agile and how to live the agile way for making a digital transformation happen.
Can you break down so let's take like 100 steps back for you probably, but break down for our audience sort of the components of a supply chain. Where do you spend a lot of your time? Just explain kind of the way that supply chain works and probably the importance of it in a business.
Supply chain management, the term goes back to the 1980s already. So there were a few consultants kind of putting that up and just describing the way of companies manage their logistics, manage their procurement, and manage their, let's say, day-to-day manufacturing operations. This is what we call supply chain management nowadays. And I really focus on the orchestration of supply chains, making use of the latest technology, really help supply chain managers do a better planning, do a better forecasting, also maybe doing a better logistics job. But it's a very, let's say, broad field of play. And whoever you talk to, some people understand supply chain is just logistics, supply chain is just warehousing, supply chain is manufacturing or plant management, but it's all. Yeah? So it's really all, it's from end to end. And this is also what supply chain management is all about, to really get a better visibility into end-to-end supply chain management itself. Yeah.
So what are the common challenges that you see when you're working with a client trying to implement new digital solutions, or even identifying if they need them?
So the biggest challenge is that the supply chain is usually not managed just by one corporation. So just one corporation is one little part or piece in the supply chain itself. So if you would think through how to produce a laptop, for a laptop, you use, you have an exterior, which is plastic. For the plastic, you need oil to produce it. You need a keyboard. You need the electronics inside. You need chips. And then you have a distribution channel. So where you have retailers, you have resellers, and then you have end clients. And then you have the whole, let's say, service support organization around it. That's all supply chain. And to orchestrate, let's say, the right demand management in supply chain, that you have enough laptops, that you have enough tier 1, tier 2 suppliers to really help you to get it done. That is the whole holy grail of supply chain management. And this is what it makes it tricky. That is not only you, it's you and all your suppliers and all your customers and all your resellers, retailers, which are involved in the supply chain. And what we also see is you usually have a bit of we call it the bullwhip effect. So when you take your bullwhip, and you start a demand from a customer perspective, it goes like this in waves until it hits the very first producer of the oil you need to produce your plastic, to produce the laptop. And these whips, so this is what you would see. We have uncertainties in demand and supply. And this is where supply chain management and also maybe digital supply chain management can create more visibility into the bullwhip waves.
For anyone listening on audio, he is making waves with his hand. So showing, I think most people watch on video, but just want to make clear for everybody. So what are some typical key outcomes or metrics that you see folks sort of running toward when you're working with a team on supply chain management? And then maybe how digital transformation can help get at some of those sort of key outcomes.
I mean, I already mentioned the end-to-end visibility in a supply chain. So it has basically 4 views. So one view is the inventory review. Another view is the production performance review or view on things. Then you look into the demand, that's clear, and into the customer service view as well. So in all these 4 dimensions in the supply chain management, you have different needs for data and information out of the data. So for example, you want to see the inventory value. You want to see the stock keeping unit health. You want to see the inventory health heat map. Do I have enough supply materials available in my manufacturing plant? You want to see demand supply details. You want to see maybe order details, drill downs, or you want to see where you see deficits in your inventory. So this is all about data, as you can imagine, and this is where we look into a digital supply chain management, where we really make sure that the look into these different views is available and is feasible and is one source of truth, let's say. So when it comes to production performance, you look into the potential undersupply, the oversupply you might have. You look into maybe projected stock outs and how do you cope with that? So and all of that is really end-to-end visibility based on data, not only data from a single company. You need the data from every single part in the supply chain that you can have a proper demand forecasting or kind of stock out forecasting, which is fine. So as long as you can manage it.
So it seems like most of these key outcomes are based on one another too, right? A lot of them have dependencies on parts before or after in sort of the management of the supply chain. So I am actually curious on how are people doing this non-digitally? Like, how is this happening? Like, what are they sort of utilizing now that feels like good enough? And what are you kind of coaching folks to see is a much better way?
Good enough is when you have at least an Excel spreadsheet. So that is kind of working. You see some supply chain managers in smaller corporations which are just using Excel or the Excel lookalikes, kind of getting away with okay, I have my spreadsheet here, I have a spreadsheet there, and I know where I have to look into the inventory situation. I know where I find the oversupply, undersupply. I do my, kind of manual calculations, and it can work. I mean, if you look into the low-cost airlines, you see some operations are managed with spreadsheets. Yeah. So, for example, or if you would look into especially construction companies. Yeah? So, construction companies where supply chain management is key. Yeah, to really get an on-time delivery. People work with spreadsheets and with kind of self-made tools, maybe, and self-made workflows, where they maybe also have a lot of paperwork inside. Yeah. So, and this is maybe the starting point of your discussion. So what do you really need? Where do you have deficits when it comes to data? Where do you have not a deep dive insight into what's going on? And where do you have to wait for somebody else in a construction company, for example, somebody else to give you more data that you can then project and kind of a date of delivery, or you can project a time of finishing something. So, and this is the situation where you can then really clearly use workflow tools. And here we come to low-code tools, maybe, to really get a hold of the data, combining these different views in one workflow with multiple parties involved.
It's really helpful to paint the picture for folks sometimes that there is still a lot of this, what feels like mission critical work happening in spreadsheets, which it sort of blows my mind often when you hear, you could have like multi-million-dollar construction companies not understanding why they can't identify what their inventory is because it's not automated, right? It's not digital. It doesn't have one view. Well, it'll keep you in business for a long time. So have we seen, this is kind of a leading question because I think the probably answer is yes, but would love to hear your specifics on the last year. A lot of these key outcomes and key metrics, how have they changed? And are there certain parts of the supply chain, maybe sourcing or logistics, or we sometimes talk about outside of the supply chain, operational excellence, any of those sort of areas changed over the last year with the impact of COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you are operating in a construction business in the US, for example, you still live in a world of a global supply chain. So some pieces you might need for your construction will be delivered out of either nearby cross-border countries or, maybe also abroad. Yeah. And this is then really creating headaches in the supply chain with either border controls or just disrupted supply chains just because things got stuck in traffic, things got stuck at customs, or some countries were in such a lockdown that they could just not produce stuff. So, and this is one effect you see with COVID, that you have, you can clearly divide the resilient supply chains in certain industries from not, or let's say, disruptive supply chains in other industries. Even we would say, very mature electronic equipment supply chains have been disrupted because most of the stuff comes from China or from Asia. So and that is quite a long way if you have a lockdown in 20 countries you need to cross. So, but this is what we saw in the COVID crisis. And it's not the situation that you have in kind of an evergreen ship which got stuck in the Suez Canal.
Right. I wasn't gonna bring that up, but yeah.
This is quite an, let's say, once in a lifetime accident, I would say, or hopefully only twice in a lifetime. But the disruption in the supply chain we really saw, limited traffic, limited shipments, limited air traffic. Yeah. So because it was just shut down. And the most resilient supply chain strategy orchestrators were looking into supply chains which are really agile. So really agile in terms of they had the flexibility to really have a second option. So for a certain supply, for a certain product or a spare part they needed. And the disrupted supply chains clearly didn't have that. And this is when we talk today about agility. This is clearly the first sign of agility, is that you have options, that you have not only an option because it's a cheaper option or it gives you a better price point, but you need an option in cases that something gets disrupted. And we don't see disruptions only from pandemic scenarios. Disruptions can also appear when you have, kind of war activities going on, when you have thunderstorms, when you have kind of nature disasters. And this is really when we talk about agile supply chains is you better have an option to be resilient.
It does seem also like, so disruption is not new, but it does feel like now there's a different sort of understanding of customer experience, of what people expect from supply chains and from businesses, that I think is probably putting them under a much stronger microscope than historically would have been sort of acceptable. Do you think that that's true?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you see one of the most important products the world needs is a vaccination nowadays, or testing for COVID. And you would say, supply chain management, when you order a laptop, it's a black box for you as a customer. And you don't care. I mean, you say, okay, the laptop producer gives me a kind of a delivery time of, okay, it will be shipped in 2 weeks and you have it in 3 weeks. And you don't care. I mean, it's a given and it's a black box. And, the discussion around a proper functioning and working supply chain when it comes to COVID vaccination is a totally different discussion, because everybody is now a supply chain management expert. At least I can speak here for Switzerland and Germany and Europe, where we have some trouble and we are way behind the US, by the way. So with the vaccination, just because the supply is not there. And you have then 260 million Europeans as supply chain experts getting really emotional about the fact, why is that vaccination not available? And then you see that people and customers then as a next step understand the supply chain logics and the downsides and the needs. And it's, it started in Europe, for example, with I would say a bit of administrative procurement process of vaccines. Then they needed to really fix the distribution. They needed to get a hold on setting up the logistics centers where you can get vaccinated and so on. So this is what we all see in a corporate world as well. When you talk about supply chain management, really it's about procurement, the logistics, the distribution, and then also the logistics in a kind of reselling environment. Here it's the vaccination section. Yeah? So and there you really see people getting more informed, more emotional, because it's such an emotional topic at the moment. And it's a real world-threatening topic. And that's why people start to understand supply chains. And they might also understand that an electric bike coming from China, being put together in Cambodia, with an engine from Bosch in Stuttgart here in Germany, might be a problem at the moment.
Yeah.
Get done in 2 weeks.
It's interesting. We had a last mile logistics expert on the show a few weeks ago. Her name's Kathy Robertson. And we were also talking to her about, she'd been working in logistics for decades, and no one in her life had ever talked to her about her job until they started losing all of their packages. Because they now understood the importance of that last mile, right? Like that you're from fulfillment center to home, right? Like as if it's a B2C sort of environment. And it does feel like a similar sort of scenario is happening with supply chain management around vaccine distribution, right? Like you're seeing in the US, like how slow the ramp was. And now, before, like way before May 1st, every, maybe not way, but it feels like way before, every adult is going to be eligible to be able to get vaccinated, which feels like lightning speed in the last month.
That's a great example, and it's a good pointer to where you see that people are working on the supply chain. It gets better and it gets faster because they start using tools. They start using to identify the weak spots in the supply chain where there is a data gap, there is a broken process, and where they say, hey, we need we need something better than a spreadsheet, and we might need a workflow on that to really make it happen. And once it's there, it works. So once it's there, it's really kind of increasing the speed dramatically. And this is what, my job is all about. And I'm really happy also to see that we as a firm really helped many supply chains to really improve the situation in this pandemic. And my colleagues are super proud of that, and we are also proud of the companies we work with and the partners like QuickBase, where you had a strong impact in the US, really making your platform available to get things done, yes, for supply chain management.
There's lots of different forms of agility here too, right? Because you're also needing to pivot as a firm on you're solving problems that didn't exist before, right? Like there is no vaccine distribution software. Like that is not right. No one thought to make that, right? So definitely not for an entire country. Has been a really interesting time to see the folks that can pivot and can flex to these new workflows that are super complex and ever changing.
No, absolutely. And let's say, so where we in former times maybe did a design of a solution in 2 months, then we implemented it in 4 to 6 months. This all had to be done in 2 weeks. Yeah. And this is a bit like a pandemic-driven hackathon. So we really have to bring the best brains and the best tools, put it together and get it done in 2 weeks.
That's probably why a lot of the tech companies were well prepared, right? Because it's a part of the muscle memory, but it still doesn't, and then a lot of these other companies that are not digital first and don't think, in sprint cycles, and probably don't think about continuous improvement as much, really struggled, right? If it's not a part of your culture to work that way, that's a really good point. I hadn't really ever thought about it as a hackathon, but you're right, it is.
It is a little bit like that, yeah. So unfortunately, hackathons are usually fun and you solve a problem which is not life-threatening, but it's great to do, and you spend a weekend with geek friends and you have a great outcome, and then you win a prize or you win an iPad or something like that. But this is a real hackathon, and I think if you go back to the agile ways of working, this is what it is. This is what Agile is all about. When we do a sprint, that is a little hackathon. And this is what we see here in the pandemic. I think the workforce now also being super flexible in the supply chains had to be very flexible. That will change the way we work. People are now used for getting together in smaller task force teams, coping with the situation. Everybody works from home. We need to think different what we did so far. Most of these procedures in supply chain management were designed for human beings sitting together. The logistics guys were maybe sitting right next in a big hall right next to the manufacturing plant. The guys in the procurement department were maybe in another building right next door. And these guys were used to, walk the halls and talk to each other. And all these processes were designed like that. And now in the remote situation, and also maybe, in the bigger corporate world, this is for sure all the time the case. In the remote world, you have to have different ways of working. And I think now with the pandemic, it's in everybody's head. Everybody sees, well, if we're not there, if we can't talk to each other, we might need different ways and different technologies for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you answered this question really around what an agile supply chain really looks like, right? So having options, having the ability to flex and adapt, really being able to change the way that you work and test. And so there is this term that we've heard around supply chain control tower. Can you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, so supply chain control tower is basically technology-enabled way of looking into the data flows in a supply chain. Yeah, so you could envision that as a room where you have all these big screens and you see all the inventory levels, what I just mentioned in the very beginning, production levels, manufacturing performance, stock out scenarios, and so on. You could envision this as one room, but you could also envision this as a dashboard. Everybody has available on a mobile or on an iPad or at your laptop. Yeah, so everybody has this at hand. And the whole idea about the control tower is really to, first of all, give the end-to-end visibility And second of all, to also give you a tool at hand where you can do a scenario planning. So where you can then really test different scenarios. And usually we sometimes go in and first of all, try to understand what is the need for a control tower or a supply chain control tower. So let me give you an example. There's a consumer electronics client of mine who was facing a challenging situation. So the client was losing sales due to poor availability and poor supply chain performance, despite having advanced planning software partially implemented for a couple of years. And they couldn't really identify why is that the case. They made the wrong bet on sales forecasting during COVID. They expected sales to plunge when instead demand surged. This sent the organization then into a deep customer backlog that the uncoordinated and slowly supply chain response failed to address. Remember the bullwhip? And I'm doing these whips again.
Yes.
This is very slow in a supply chain. Yeah. What they then did, we did a 0 to 60 mile per hour in 4 weeks with them on that topic. We really stabilized the situation by really using digital blueprints for standing up control towers. We bootstrapped the data and, kind of harmonized 15 extracts and 25 plus data tables from ERP and ad hoc data sources. And then we established the process and cadence for executives to really make decisions to address supply demand gaps in near term, shed light on the most acute problems in the supply chain, and serve as a lab to identify process weaknesses. And this was all accompanied by lots of dashboards, lots of data available in nice screens, in a nicely represented graphical representation of the data, where you could then have a bit like a war room. And I don't like the word war room because it includes war, and I don't like that. But it's like a data room where you can make decisions. You have all data at hand, and as I said, extracted from ERPs, from legacy systems, all put together. And this is what we then designed in a control room. Yeah? And we ran agile sprints to get data included. We had a 6 weeks program for them where we then also not only designed all these dashboards and the control tower environment, we also did a bit of capability building and driving the change management, that everybody can build a bit of a dashboard on his or her own. And now coming maybe also back to local platforms. This you can do with local platforms, because you can train citizen developers. And in this case, it was the supply chain guys. They are now the citizen developers, really putting these things together and really being able to run their own applications and to design their own applications and to program their own applications.
Speaking our language, Martin. Exactly. I would love to hear a little bit about your experience with low-code, no-code platforms and the work that you've done in implementing them with some of your clients. What are some of the sort of like some of the reputation that these platforms have within businesses that you've had to sort of dispel as you've built them out to really be able to maintain that end-to-end visibility in the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, low-code platforms initially came from maybe a different needs in the business, and more a need in IT functions. They really speeded up the way how to build applications. And then I would say with this notion comes the anxiety of IT leaders. Oh, somebody is using a low-code platform that sounds to me like shadow IT, what we created in a business function. And that is a bit true, but not really. So because it's not that the business function doesn't channel the demand and the requirement specifications through a proper IT process. It's just that maybe local platforms provide to the business a kind of faster and more agile way to really work on small solutions and maybe to solve problems which are so business specific that maybe a typical IT workflow tool cannot really deal with it. Yeah, so there are great workflow tools in the market, don't get me wrong, for invoice posting and acceptance and for travel and expense management. And you see many of these workflow tools super well designed, and one fits mostly all. Yeah, so when it comes to travel management, because an expense is an expense. On the other hand, they are so specific, and that is also maybe a good landing spot for your solution, so specific to a supply chain need in only this special construction company, which nobody else has. And you don't find solutions in the market. And that's why IT is sometimes afraid of building out shadow ITs, because it's under control, it's out of control, it's expensive, we don't know about the quality, and these guys have been trained on ITIL, they are used to the fact, okay, this is the process, this is the IT department, and we don't want people to look into it because it's so complex. And if you fool around with it, you break down the system. Yeah, and this is the notion we need to discuss first. Yeah, so when I started to look into these solutions decades ago already, I always tried to sneak around the IT function and the IT leaders. I really changed my behavior in the last 10 years. I include IT leaders up front and discuss with them what is the nature of the work we are doing on the business process. Why are we using local platforms to do that? Just to make sure that these guys are on top of things, that they are not excluded from this discussion, because I can understand them where they're coming from. And what you do with a local platform is really you give a business user a solution at hand. Nobody would stop them from using Excel. Yeah? So nobody would stop them from using maybe a Tableau dashboard. But for local platforms, since it used to be so close to IT, every IT leader from the past or bit aged in the position thinks, that's IT. They shouldn't do that. And this is what we can crack.
Yeah, it seems like from our experience that Excel can be much more damaging in the long run.
Oh yeah, because if you forgot that you programmed a macro on your month-end closing procedures and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore, the accounting figures turn to be wrong. And this can create lots of headaches. I mean, I was working also with a lot of finance and accounting departments on kind of improving the situation with getting rid of macros. And this is something you're totally right. Excel can harm, because in Excel, you don't see a version, you don't see who has programmed it, you don't see an owner, and you don't see where the data is coming from. And that is basically something you don't want to have.
And you'll end up probably in that case, the business then going to IT saying, we need you to build a custom solution for us because what we're currently using isn't working. It's a really interesting thing to take a look at, that business and IT relationship, and how it feels like low code, no code platforms can really create a very a close and really symbiotic relationship between the business and IT. If IT is able to really govern and create security around these platforms, and the business is then able to build digital solutions that enable them to do their work better and respond to change, like we were talking about, right? You need to be adaptable and flexible, right? Like these are sort of tools that allow folks to do that.
Yeah. If you have a scenario coming back to the control tower in a supply chain where you have to act immediately or in days, it doesn't work to go back to the IT function and to ask for, hey, can you program something? That takes too long. Now, let me give you an example. There's a control tower analyst which says, okay, we have a stock out observed for the next 4-8 weeks on some of our top stock keeping units. Yeah, so the top products we want to sell. So you have a projected stock out. So what you do? Let's discuss. Maybe we are short in one region. Let's discuss how we can really close that. You would then, kind of discuss different scenarios, like kind of an orders push out scenario where you kind of prolong the orders. You could pull in additional supply from others. You can buy additional products and you can just sell them and you don't produce them yourself. Or you could transfer stock maybe from one region which has no urgency to the other region. And all these, scenario comparisons, and to put this scenario together with a new supply pull-in scenario, for example, I mean, you need to program that somehow. So, and if you would do this, you could do it with Excel, yeah, for sure. But if you do this with the classic IT application development cycles, you would not have an answer to this stock out scenario in a couple of days. Yeah. So, and if you would look into maybe the textile and fashion industry, this is how they do it. So they have low-code platforms to do these things, to do all the scenario planning and to really undergo, or let's say, underpin their let's say, scenarios, stock control towers. And this is the only way they can do it. I mean, you know how fast fashion is. Yeah? So this is a weekly cycle they have. Yeah? And they have stock outs everywhere. And especially now with COVID, nobody knew when the ski resorts open. Nobody knew if you can go to Florida spring break. Nobody knew, and you cannot produce fashion for that. Yeah. And you run out of stock once, you know, a governor says, okay, we open the restaurants. Out of stock for flip-flops. I don't know.
Yeah.
Things like that. So and this is really fast-moving consumer goods, textile, fashion, but also other scenarios in constructions or in pharma supply chains. And so these are really the cases where you really need speed.
Yeah, what is it? I think is it Zara that has like one of the most agile and flexible supply chains? You study it like every bit, like of course study at business school, like they are like the pinnacle of, you know, adaptable and flexible. And that's why they're able to keep their pricing at a certain level, right? So it's very cool to think you can look across industries to see, you know, I'm sure a construction company could look at someone like Zara and learn a lot from the way that they've built their supply chain, and probably vice versa.
It's a Harvard business case study. It is.
Yeah, it is.
You're right.
I'm like, I definitely learned this somewhere. Glad I'm using it. That means you know.
No, absolutely. It's a good example, and you see great examples, and then they also have a resilient supply chain, very agile, having different suppliers. The same T-shirt in a certain design you can get from factories out of Kambodscha as well as factories from China. So same style, same design.
All right, let's talk about tech stack. This is kind of our last topic here. So if you're building a tech stack to really enable agility within your supply chain, within your from end to end, how do you think, so how would someone go about doing that? Like sort of what are the components of an agile tech stack?
Yeah, so you would start with the basics of the infrastructure. You would say, okay, let's look into the infrastructure needs, into security. And these are the little tick boxes you need to do. Yeah. So because just to also give you a CIO a good feeling, that you don't do something stupid on the platform, let's say. And then I would say the next really step is you need to look into the data and the governance of the data, where it comes from, because this is a little bit like the map. If you go on a hike, you need a map. You know where you get water, you know where you have a little restaurant where you get a sandwich, you know where the top of the mountain is. Yeah. So, and with this map, that's the data governance. You know where to find things and you know where they're coming from. This is a little bit what you really need to set up. So I think the data governance on top of the infrastructure is then really the clear, most painful one. Yeah? So because sometimes the data is not good enough, sometimes it's not really, it's not clean. Sometimes you don't have the data, and you need to think through, where do I get it? And this is then how you really start to look into the data governance. Yeah, and then it's all about automation. So where you really want to scale it, so you need to have the data feeds, the data inputs automated in best cases, that you don't have the manual bottlenecks, people entering data or kind of filling in forms to get it done. And then once you have this all set, you have the right infrastructure, you have the right data, and you have automated processes, then you are basically ready to rumble.
Awesome. So Martin, this has been so fantastic. You're a wealth of knowledge. So we always appreciate you being here. Our final question on the podcast is always a question about you. So how are you doing? How have you and your family been over the last year? I'm sure a very crazy work year, I can imagine.
So no, we were very productive. So we just got our third son. So
Oh, great.
he was born right before Christmas. So he's somebody you would nowadays consider as a Corona kid. So he was born in the crisis, but we really love this addition to the family. And one benefit of being locked down at home is that I can spend time with the extended family, and I can really enjoy not being on the road, not being in the US, traveling to my clients. And this is a bit joyful, although this whole situation is also creating some headaches, with childcare, with homeschooling, as we all do. One of my friends has his kitchen looks like a school. So with all these white papers with basic calculus on it and stuff like that. But I mean, this is what it is, and I think it brings families together. It for sure creates headaches. And also maybe people are lonely and all by themselves. If you don't have a great family, then it's tough. Yeah. So, but I'm doing good, and things going smoother now here in Switzerland where I live. So we will. Over the Easter break, spend a few days out at the lake. So that should be fine, yeah?
Nice. I'm so glad to hear it. Well, where can folks find you if they want to follow some of your work? Are you active on any of your social accounts? I think LinkedIn is probably the one to find you.
So if you want to see me at the lake, you can contact me on Facebook. So I'm I was born in 1974, so I'm using Facebook. From my professional passion, you can follow me on LinkedIn. So I share everything cool I see from friends, from my tech geek friends. I share stuff from the firm, from McKinsey, which is quite insightful at some stages and most of the times. And I am also active on various conferences. You find me on supply chain conferences, on the SAP now, for example, here in Switzerland, having a keynote on supply chain resilience. If you want to see what's happening, LinkedIn is a good place, and also McKinsey.com. We have great podcasts on supply chain agility as well.
Awesome. Martin, thank you so much. And to everyone out there, make sure to like and subscribe and review. You can listen to us on anywhere that you get your favorite podcasts, as well as watch video on YouTube and our website, quickbase.com/podcasts. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in our next episode. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Shannon.